Today we are at Lower Cato Falls Park in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. One of the interesting features about the park is that it's located in almost the exact geographical center of Manitowoc County. The park has a number of rustic trails, several picnic areas, an 18-hole disc golf course, playground equipment, and a fine pavilion. But it is not my intention to tell their story. There are a number of fine videos on YouTube that cover these features in detail. My purpose today is to cover the fascinating history of the Lower Falls from the 1600s to around 2010, when the last major improvement was completed. I go all the way back to the 1600s simply because the white man was not the first culture to stumble upon this beautiful location. Long before the arrival of the white man, Indians from the Chippewa, Menominee, and Ojibwe tribes traveled the Manitowoc River in their homemade birch bark canoes. Around the year 1900, Dr. Felge, a noted local Indian expert from Manitowoc County, put together a list of 75 Indian locations in the county. The list included burial grounds, campsites, and locations of found food caches, but he did not include Lower Cato Falls, and for that matter, Maribel Caves, another area of wonder and beauty located in the county. I have often wondered why Dr. Felge didn't include Lower Cato Falls or Maribel Caves on his list. Both places would have been ideal for an Indian campground, or even more so for a burial ground. Then I took a closer look at the rapids, the limestone walls, and the cave in the center of the basin. That to the Indians would probably have been a spiritual or mystical place. They in no way would have camped in such a location and upset the spirits. They certainly did pass through the rapids and the basin on their way to Lake Michigan. They may even have stopped to leave an offering to the spirits, but they would not have camped there. The first white man arrived in what would be Manitowoc County in the 1830s. When they stumbled on the Lower Cato Rapids and surrounding area, do you think they said, "Gee, someday this will make an impressive county park"? I seriously doubt it. But what they did see were the trees, the pine, oak, spruce, cedar that covered the landscape along the river. They realized that by cutting the timber in the winter and placing it on the frozen Manitowoc River, that in spring, when the ice melted, the river would float it to Manitowoc for sale. So they set about establishing a logging camp in what we now call the Bowl. They built a large cabin to house at least a half-dozen hardy lumbermen. They would continue to use the cabin until the good lumber ran out along the river. As the population of Manitowoc County continued to grow, more and more groups and individuals used the bowl and surrounding area above the bluffs as a picnic and camping area. For example, in 1897, the Rar Guards, a paramilitary unit from Manitowoc, set up their summer military camp in the bowl and used it for both camping and drilling. In 1899, a party of at least 25 persons rented two large horse-drawn wagons that took them to Lower Falls, where they partied in the bowl. They had to hire a third wagon to bring in their food, drinks, and other provisions. And in 1910, an extremely large party in the bowl included two orchestras that played over a period of 2 days. The question is, how did they manage to get to the bowl? The bowl is at the bottom of a very steep hill, which would have required an extreme effort to haul equipment and provisions enough for a large party. Also, when we now travel to the falls, we take County Road JJ, a blacktop and well-maintained road. Back in the days just mentioned, the road would have been nothing less than a poorly serviced dirt trail once used by the Indians as they traveled along the river. When the trail was taken over by the county and made into a dirt road, it was named County Road J. But unofficially, the name, which is still used sometimes today, is the River Road. From about 1920 to 1938, the falls and surrounding area saw little use. The Great Depression had set in and the people had little money for large parties. What did see a lot of use was the large basin just below the rapids and directly below the bluffs. It turned out to be one of the finest fishing holes in the county. Large northern pike, bluegills, crappies, and even trout could be caught on a regular basis before dams were installed downriver, blocking the migration of the trout. Then, in 1938, Manitowoc County took a renewed interest in turning the area into a county park. This was expedited by the federal government through a WPA work project along with the funds to complete the project. One such project was a $10,000 grant to clear the many obstructions blocking the Manitowoc River above, at, and below the rapids. These obstructions had been blocking the river for many years. They also cleared the shore of rocks, underbrush, and other growth that was expected to aid in eliminating flood conditions in spring. With this work complete, other ideas for the area were proposed. One such idea was the construction of a dam placed directly on top of the rapids. This would create a small lake going back the 1 mile to the village of Clark's Mills. The idea was presented to the Manitowoc County Board, The county board liked the idea and went to the extreme of appearing before the Public Service Commission in Madison to ask for a permit to construct a dam. Without any additional study or paperwork, the Public Service Commission granted the request. What finally put an end to the proposed dam was a financial study by the county board that determined a dam at that location would cost the county between $25,000 and $30,000. We must remember this was 1938 and the Great Depression was still affecting the pocketbooks of the citizens of Manitowoc County. Whatever the reason that killed the idea of the dam, it is without a doubt that a dam at that location would have ruined the beauty of the river at that location. That same year, the county was asked to improve access to Lower Falls off County Road J. This was not done as all the land off J was privately owned and the county would have had to have purchased land for an access. So for almost the next 30 years, the area that is now the county park remained unchanged. I first became acquainted with Lower Cato Falls as a young boy. I grew up in Valders, a small village just 3 miles west of the falls. As a young boy, I was a member of Troop 18 Valders Boy Scouts, and of course one of our favorite camping sites was the bowl located above the basin and to the east of the bluff. This was in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and as stated earlier, there was no public access to the falls. Fortunately, the farmer that lived just off County JJ and above the rapids, a Mr. Donald Pedersen, liked Boy Scouts and allowed us to park our vehicles in his yard between his house and barn. Even parking in his yard meant a long walk through several farm fields and down the steep hill to the bowl. It usually meant several trips to bring in our tents, bedrolls, food, and other scout equipment necessary for a good campout. Once our camp was in order, we set about doing scout things, such as cutting firewood, building a campfire, fishing, and working on our merit badges. In the evening, we would sit around the campfire and tell stories. 2 of these stories told to us by our scout leaders were stories of the bowl we were camped in. The first was of the early logging camp and the loggers that lived there. As the story goes, one night 2 of the loggers had a little too much to drink, and while trying to find their way back to their logging shack in the dark, got a little too close to the ledge which is directly in front of us, which overlooks the basin. Both loggers fell into the deep water of the basin and drowned. Their bodies were found downriver several days later. The second story was that of a lady that took over the property and logging shack after the loggers had completed logging the area. She expanded the cabin into a nice home and lived there several years. Then, without a word, she mysteriously disappeared. It took several weeks, but they finally found her body downriver. It is believed she too went over the ledge and into the bowl. By accident or intentionally is unknown. Several years later, the house, which was then abandoned, burnt down. It is unknown if it was hit by lightning or burned down on purpose by someone in the area. Several times I tried to find a story of the lumbermen and the lady in the early Manitowoc papers, but found no mention of their demise. I do know for a fact that there was a building in the bowl at the base of the hill, as when we camped there in the late 1950s, you could still see the outline of the structure where it had once sat. Also, a number of rocks used as a foundation for the building were still in place. Even today, many of these same rocks can be found scattered around that area and when we dug our deep fire pits, we often came across burnt and charred lumber, broken plates, and hardware used in construction of buildings. I'm sure if they ever did an archaeological dig at this site, they would have a field day. I lost track of developments at Lower Cato Falls in September 1966 when Uncle Sam called and volunteered my services to fight a war in Vietnam. When I returned home in the summer of 1968, almost a year and a half later, my father filled me in on what I had missed. In August 1967, the Manitowoc County Board purchased 34 acres of land at the falls for $16,000 for a county park. 27 acres were from Donald Pedersen, 5 acres from Thomas Hayden, and 2 acres were donated by the Wisconsin Public Service Corporation. In early 1968, a new gravel access road and parking lot was installed at a cost of $2,700. But what excited my father the most was that in May 1968, the Valders Lions Club began a campaign to build a 9-hole golf course on the newly acquired property. The plans included possible expansion to an 18-hole course. My father, who was a member of the Valders Lions, was also an avid golfer and backed the idea every chance he got. Unfortunately, the campaign came to an end when the extreme cost of installing a golf course was discovered. Ironically, an 18-hole golf course would one day find its way to the park, but the golfers would not be using golf balls as they played the course. The following year, 1969, the county continued to improve the property to the tune of $12,000. They installed a well and pump, toilet facilities, picnic tables, and the first of 2 stairways to the rapids. They also allowed primitive camping in the bowl for up to 14 days at no cost. Since that time, the county has acquired an additional 50 acres of land for the park, added a modern pavilion with restroom facilities, playground equipment, and additional picnic areas. At this time, no camping is allowed on the park grounds, but most important was the addition of the 18-hole disc golf course, which is kept in prime condition spring, summer, and fall. I want to thank you for joining me in our tour of Lower Cato Falls County Park. If you have never had the opportunity to visit this beautiful park and falls, I suggest you do so next time you're in the area. Pack a lunch and give yourself plenty of time to see the many wonderful features of this 80-plus acre park, one of the wonders of Manitowoc County.